Welcome back, everybody, to the DC New 52 review. I want to thank you personally very much for tuning into this episode. I'm your host, Pauly DC, and let's get right into this thing. In this episode, we will discuss OMAC Volume 1. It was titled OMACTIVATE and was written by the creative team of Dan Didio and Keith Giffen and illustrated also by Scott Koblish. The series went from 2011 in November to June of 2012, and the character was originally created by the one and only Jack Kirby and has gone by many names like the Omni-Mind and Community, Observational Metahuman Activity Construct, the One-Man Army Corps, but in this version, he's known as the One-Man Attacked Construct. Things kick off at a wing of a DC long-term institute, Cadmus Industries, in Metropolis, with two workers being seen, Jody Robbins and Tony J, plus their vice president, Martin Wellman. All seems to be going absolutely terrible, as our titular character is tearing through the place in search of some secret underground levels, and once he's there, we see the incredible power this OMAC version has, and that he's being controlled by the sentient satellite known as Brother Eye. As a huge fan of Orwell's 1984, I think it's criminal that the character, or whatever you want to call Brother Eye, wasn't used in more titles and didn't show up again until much later in what we can still consider the New 52. Anyway, multiple people, or things, rather, try to stop OMAC, like the psychic Double X, something called a Build-A-Friend, oh boy, and Gobblers. And they're all sent by someone, or something, named Lord Mokari, but they end up being absolutely no match for OMAC, especially after a certain new surge power ability is shown. The issue wraps up with OMAC gaining access to the Cadmus mainframe, all on behalf of Brother Eye, and then teleporting out of there, but on the other side of the teleportation, he's transformed back to his human form, Kevin Coe, who is actually an original character, and this is the first time he's ever seen in a comic book. In issue number 2, some answers are given as to who Kevin Coe actually is, and what Cadmus really does. Mainly, it's run by something called Checkmate, which is the top global peace agency on Earth. After that, most of the plot is devoted to Brother Eye tricking Kevin into apprehending a dangerous Cadmus fugitive out in Texas, a guy named Rocker Bond, aka the Amazing Man. Not really much, but it was meant to show how cunning and calculating Brother Eye can be. And oh yeah, plus we see the leader of Checkmate, longtime bad, good, I don't know guy, Maxwell Lord. Issue number 3 continues along the lines of its predecessor, as this time Brother Eye takes Kevin out to Louisiana and gets him intentionally sent to a prison in order to locate a Professor Arouse, aka Sci-Fi Man, aka Macho Earthworm Jim. Once he's located, OMAC comes out to apprehend him, but their fight is interrupted by Sarge Steele, who was seen briefly in issue number 2, and he's got his team of Mary Bell and Little Nipper. These 3 agents of Checkmate all try to use some crazy weapons on OMAC, but like the enemies before them, they are no match for him when his full potential of power is shown. All while that's going on, we see Brother Eye having another conversation with Maxwell Lord like he did in issue number 1, and we see that they have a somewhat checkered past together. Yeah, okay, that was the closest thing I could find to a chess pun there. The boards are checkered in that game too, relax, okay. After that little chat with Maxwell, Brother Eye has to get OMAC out of the prison due to Sci-Fi Man escaping. Again, not a huge amount of content to cover in this issue, but it was building up for a bigger plot that never came, unfortunately. Kevin is finally returned home in issue number 4, but now Maxwell Lord has officially put Lord Mokari in charge of destroying OMAC, so he gets right to work on creating a new Build-A-Friend. Yikes. This new creation does eventually find Kevin right after he discovers that going underground severs his connection with Brother Eye. And I actually thought that was kind of stupid. I mean, the power this thing is already shown to have, it's vast, and it loses its partner by going into a friggin' subway station? Come on. I mean, yeah, it does build up a little tension in this issue due to the Build-A-Friend sicking biogators on Kevin and him having no defense against them. That encounter naturally makes its way to the sewers, where Kevin has to navigate through until finding an area to reconnect with Brother Eye and practically beg him for help. We see that Brother Eye is a real sulker and kinda petty, but once he's reconnected with Kevin and OMAC is back, the Biogators are quickly defeated, which can only mean one thing. Maxwell Lord must contact Frankenstein. Wait, what? Now, if you've seen my Frankenstein Volume 1 video, I really hope you do, you'll pretty much know what happens in this issue already. Some scenes are written word for word with just different art, but moving on from that, the fight between Frankenstein and OMAC is pretty friggin' sweet. It's well laid out, and you're really not sure who's gonna win. As the two big guys fight, Brother Eye and Shade are trying to take over each other, but neither is 100% successful. The only thing that is lost is an arm from Frankenstein, and probably a lot of sleep from Kevin in the future. And on the last page, we see Lord Mokari speaking of something called the Zero Patient to his Grand Director, who, if you know what the character looks like, appears to be Desaad of Apocalypse. Issue number 6 shows us what effects being OMAC has on Kevin's mental psyche, while he also does some research on Brother Eye, with rather subtle hints to its creators. Batman and Mr. Terrific. Speaking of Brother Eye, it's continued to make contact with Maxwell Lord and mentions the Zero Patient to him in this issue, which he feigns knowledge on at first, but then reveals he's unaware of what it is, as seen when he questions Lord Mokari very angrily about it. And in this issue, a tiny bit more of information of the Zero Patient is shown, and it looks to be a specimen with DNA spliced together from all the Justice League members. Cutting back to Kevin, he's getting roped into a double date with his dickhead work colleague, Tony, which includes Jody, who Kevin is dating, but that's easy to forget as they're only together in one page in issue number 4, which ends as well as Carrie's prom night, but moving on. Tony's date is a woman we saw in issue number 5 briefly as a Cadmus higher-up named Leilani, but she quickly sheds her blouse and business skirt for an energy whip and freaky life-sucking birds called chongos, which I tried getting a bit of research going on, and I got results like extinct people of North Chile, and the Mexican word for monkey or slang term for boy in that country. So why the word chongo was chosen, you may ask? I don't know, and I don't care. Sweet Leilani, as she is now calling herself, is revealed to be a female Fury from Apocalypse, and goes after Kevin immediately, knowing he's OMAC, and mentions a mother box, which is the closest thing we get to any origin for our titular hero. OMAC does eventually come out to fight, but during this interaction, Brother Eye has to use a new ability to make sure that he is the victor. Man, this guy is overpowered. Little Miss Sweet Leilani looks like she's actually going to be the first victim of OMAC, as he's looking like he's about to kill her, but she teleports away just before, which I actually thought was going to go down and act as a kind of catalyst for Kevin to finally figure out how to control OMAC due to the guilt and extreme angst. It's tricky to find out details on when a creative team is actually made aware that the series they're working on is being cancelled, but as issue 7 comes around here, more characters are introduced and even a cameo of Superman himself comes, so I assume this title was a write number 8 and be done situation. But that's just my guess, and it could be totally wrong. But as I said, this story begins with Superman doing battle with OMAC as a favor to Maxwell Lord, and he's not completely controlling the fight, which really begs the question as to how strong OMAC really is. However, Superman can't be too upstaged by whatever mid-letter tier character OMAC was considered at the time, so he begins to win the fight, and OMAC has to take off and ends up in a zoo in Ohio. Lovely. This is where he comes into contact with 4 beings straight out of the island of Dr. Moreau: Tuffy, Tusky, Reddy, and Stripesy. Even with the quartet being friendly, Kevin, who I don't care how much crazy shit you've seen in the past few weeks, doesn't absolutely freak out, even though these things are absolutely terrifying, and decides to befriend them instead and agrees to help with a task they have, because yeah, sure, why not? The task at hand is to find Tuffy's dad, who they for some reason find in a cave underneath a carousel, but he ends up being not very friendly at all. While the animals go wild, OMAC is sent by Brother Eye to find the creator of all of them, who ends up being the half-brother of Lord Mokari, and also a friggin' chimp called Simeon, which raises many questions and opportunity for puns, but I'll spare you this time around. OMAC catches Simeon, showing off that he is now an Ape X, Predator? Alright. That was just one, settle down. But before OMAC can get his hands on him, Tuffy has to kill his father after a huge fight, thus causing a minor distraction, so realizing there's no more time to monkey around. Alright, I'm sorry, okay? He takes off, leaving Kevin and the animals to go their separate ways. In the series finale, issue number 8, Kevin's backstory is pretty much fully told in narration by him. All the while, OMAC is going complete assault mode on a Checkmate HQ, fighting through guards, Sarge Steele and his team, and a giant magma-looking creature. After all of that, and adding another hand to his collection, Kevin ends up at his home, since a bunch of plot threads had to kind of be wrapped up in brisk fashion. One of them is Jody being at the apartment waiting for him, and she's wearing a Superman Super S t-shirt, which is kind of grin-worthy, considering Supes was burning half the face off of Kevin's alter ego recently. Now that I mention OMAC, it is seen here that Jody discovers he and Kevin are one and the same, even though it was very obvious during their last dinner date. But really, that's not too important, and before the two have a chance to conversate about it, Kevin is pretty much immediately tracked, but it never ends up well for the people that take on OMAC, and in this case, it's no different. Instead of seeing OMAC fight his way through a bunch more random guards, we see Maxwell Lord pull a checkmate on Brother Eye after he finally found him up in space, and used decoy bombs to actually be used as metallic space debris that magnetizes itself and encapsulates the hull of Brother Eye, thus neutralizing him. Wait, did I just call it a him? Is that weird? Okay. Right before Brother Eye is technically finished for the time being, he conducts one final gambit of severing his connection to OMAC, thus not allowing Kevin to ever revert back to his human form. Maxwell Lord is seen going off to his next objective on whatever kind of mode of transportation that is. Meanwhile, OMAC says goodbye to Jody and walks off into the sunset. Or Justice League International Volume 2. Alright, well, what can I say about this title? It was one of the few that only made it to 8 issues before it got the axe, and due to that, most of the characters, good or bad, cool or not, went nowhere. Sci-Fi Man, Tuffy, and the other animals, Sweet Leilani, are never seen again if I'm not mistaken. Even Maxwell Lord is hardly ever seen as well, and the whole Brother Eye backstory would have to wait much longer into the future, and it was seen in rather interesting fashion in a crossover event that again was seen way in the future. I just kind of felt like this character, or series rather, could have been told and put into a different context, like maybe renamed as Checkmate, focusing more on that whole organization instead of OMAC being the more focal point of the series. I also read that he was somewhat of a prevalent character in the DC Rebirth version of Blue Beetle, which would have heavily benefited both characters here instead. But let's talk a little bit about the creative team. Keith Giffen and Dan Didio always do comedic banter effortlessly, and the art here throughout the book is bright and pastel with great use of old school comic panel setup. Those two fantastic longtime creators would go on to write a few other titles together, taking characters like the Orange Lantern Larfleeze and plot lines involving a zonked out Justice League 1,000 years in the future and making them worth reading tenfold. OMAC would also go on to make some other appearances throughout the New 52 and other titles, the first of which being Justice League International. And if you have made it this far into the video, I want to personally thank you again very much for tuning in and for watching to the end, and to please like, share, and subscribe, follow us on our social media platforms, and to join us next time for Justice League International Volume 1.